Rob Lee here, folks, from MTR Podcasts, and this month's presenting sponsor is Double Dutch Boutique. Double Dutch is vintage-inspired flair with a contemporary cut. The boutique features sought-after independent designers from around the world, as well as assorted goods produced by local artists and makers. Double Dutch promises a shopping experience just as unique as its clothes. Pop on over to www.doubledutchboutique.com today for their latest goods. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I'm your host, Rob Lee, and my next guest is an emerging and uncategorized queer Latinx artist of Mexican descent living and working in the U.S. We have Hoesy Corona. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So thank you. We actually had a good conversation before we got started here. So
we did.
Yeah. So I gave that really 1,000-foot view, and it's deeper than that, right? It's deeper than that. Is what you're doing and what your work is about and the art that you aim to pursue. So speak on that. Speak on what your work is about and why you're pursuing it.
So, that was a good intro. I definitely do recently started identifying as an uncategorized artist, totally made up, but I'm like, you know what, it works for what I'm trying to do. My work is really multidisciplinary in nature and spans installation, performance, sculpture, 2D work, as well as video. So really very broad. I guess one constant is that color is always central to the work in one way or another. And I really think this is stemming from my early training as a painter. Mm-hmm. And throughout my work, I consider what it means to be a queer Latinx artist in a place where there are few. And in the process, I examine both the psychological and physical ramifications of never seeing yourself reflected anywhere. I do this while also celebrating the ingenuity of immigrants in the United States, despite our unique circumstances. And I pursued art, you know what? I think I pursued art for the promise that it held to be able to craft something out of very modest materials, but also for its promise to facilitate the crafting of an artist's personhood.
I dig it.
Yeah, that was a little, I got a little esoteric there, yeah.
It's this notion of, in my meager background in it, like of taking, almost practically nothing or very meager things as you described. And, looking at this, like even from the space I'm in, sitting here, I don't have the greatest equipment in the world. I have a green screen. I have a 10-year-old mixer and a computer that's hanging on by a thread. And it's just being able to take those things and bring together whatever that it is to make it something for the audience that people seem to like. And that's the approach that I like to take. And the category, the uncategorized notion, that I like that. I think it invites more dialogue about the work. So speaking on it, what are some of your artistic movements that have and artists that have influenced you?
Oh, a million. But, I feel like whenever I get this question, it's a lot of different things that enter my mind. But for me, I think speaking on artists, I've really been influenced and inspired by artists who are always, doing their own thing on their own lane, kind of like living their own little world, and existing and thriving in between media, which, really speaks to my approach to making. But folks, who are now maybe past would be Felix Gonzalez Torres, Eva Hess, Ana Mendieta, Luis Bourgeois, Matisse, Cezanne, Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera. Contemporary artists that, are still with us would be Coco Fusco, Teresita Fernandez, Pedro Reyes, Rafa Esparza, La Chica Boom. And so all of these artists, again, have this thread in common of really working in between media, kind of like pushing boundaries in their own way. For instance, Pedro Reyes is now working with stone. And it's like, even though that's very traditional, it feels fresh in 2021. Other artists are just, in between performance and installation. Rafa Esparza making Adobe bricks that he hires his family to make them. And then he covers galleries with this Adobe bricks and then installs the work on top of that. So for me, that's so fascinating. So just artists doing their own thing.
as you were describing, I was like, what are these names I'm going to remember? I'm just typing them in because that's what I do. As soon as someone mentions an artist, someone mentions like music or something that they're drawing some influence from, I think there is a transitory nature where you'll get influenced by. It's like, it may not be your area, it may not be your thing, and it may not be a discipline that you're working with, but you'll get something out of it.
And that's the beauty of art, right? I mean, it makes me think, when you said that, it makes me think of music, where you may not understand music. I'm not a musician, but music strikes you, or you feel it in your soul, and you're like, what is this? What's going on? So like, we can go in and out of these different forms of art and not necessarily have to understand them to feel them, to understand their power.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I find that, so when I'll sit here and I'll have like the interview schedule for the course of a week, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, all right, let's try to come up with something. Let's not do stale questions. Let's try to come up with fresh questions. And I find that I'll either put something on, and it may be instrumental music, maybe I need lyrics, I need something. Mm-hmm. And I notice, depending on what I've listened to, it shifts the type of questions. I might get a little bit, hey man, let's free jazz it. And I'll look back of, hey, I was listening to jazz when I came up with those questions, or it might be something that's more kind of just straight to that point, and I may improv it a little bit. I was listening to a different genre. I may have been listening to some really long, super long instrumentation, like some Fela Kuti or something, and I'm getting something out of it. And I just noticed that changed how I approach things. It changed part of my process.
Isn't that beautiful? That's the power of art. Mm-hmm.
So you touched on just various things: installation, performance, video, 2D, everything.
Seriously.
And in what ways does your process differ between them in very simple terms? Because it's a lot, right? And which ways can they be similar? Because, you run into people and you're like, oh, all of these are very different. Where do you find time? But it's like, they may be similar to how you receive them, how you perceive them. So speak on those differences and those similarities between the mediums in which you work in.
Well, yeah, I would say that there's definitely, obviously there's plenty of both, but definitely there's a lot of similarities in that, it was a very conscious decision for me to expand beyond painting, which was actually kind of difficult for me. I had actually a professor once who just had me aside, and they were like, you are like hammering paintings together, throwing canvas painted on your body, like to cover the body. You should be in the sculptural department, or maybe in fibers. And I was borderline offended, because I was so sold on this idea of like the painter being kind of like the utmost artist that you could be. But after I kind of breaking away from that, making that conscious decision to kind of like without censoring, really just going in and exploring these other ways of producing work. I think that having made that conscious decision helped me in that I feel like I've always brought in those painterly elements or that painterly history as a way to never feel scared per se of like something new, because I know that I can always fall back on formal elements, or I understand color, or I understand how to take care of a surface, the surface of a canvas. So suddenly I'm like, oh, it's not so scary. It's just now I'm working in performance. And so I think about the space, even though it's not a canvas, I'm like, I'm still in charge of activating the space that I'm drawing attention to. So in that way, the different media is, similar, but obviously I can't be too romantic about it, because, getting the color out of a little tube that's red is very different from, finding how to shift something while video editing. You know what I mean? Right. So the technical elements, those are limitations, and that you have to overcome them to be able to use them the way you want to. So technical limitations, they're their own thing, and they're so unique to each, media. But overall, it's a fun challenge, and I'm genuinely interested in kind of like expanding my repertoire of tools that I can use to produce work in, but also just, generally being just present with it and being like, you know what, this is the best vehicle for XYZ project I'm working on. So, realizing that maybe painting couldn't accomplish what the performance could, or the video could kind of work nicely next to the performance, so that opens up just more possibilities. And I'm like, you know what? Yes. And also it's 2021. Like, we have access to machines, we have access to printing situations, we have I mean, drones, you name it, 3D printing. Like, yeah. I haven't gone into 3D printing, but I'm like, that's exciting and it's available. Like, when have you been able to access that kind of machinery before, It
makes sense. It resonates in that way. And I'm picking up what you're putting down in terms of that connects with what you said earlier about that kind of your influences and that kind of DIY. Like, here's my lane. I'm picking it. It might change, but this is my lane. My lane is TBA.
And you know what? And it was not necessarily always, I wasn't always kind of like confident doing that, because there is kind of this invisible, and I guess it's a historical thing, but this invisible pressure of, you're not going to be as successful if you don't claim something that's more, easily understood. So for instance, I'm a painter. It's like, not that that's any simpler, but, okay, a painter. So you work within the realms of painting, versus now, using the word uncategorized, to your point, that it kind of like allows for more dialogue there. But I didn't always feel comfortable about that, because I felt that maybe I was limiting my opportunity pool.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, fuck it. That's fine. I don't care.
It's almost counter to the notion, because I run in and I admire people who they may come off as a little out there, a little off, whatever. But when they're like, look, I'm going to make sneakers and produce this rap album, or I'm going to go into painting, and these things that people feel like you shouldn't be able to do. And it's just like, I'm going to call myself this. I'm a creator. I'm doing this. And people will make this concerted effort to make you smaller and to put you in this. It's putting you in this box, to use that, beaten horse.
Yes.
But we'll put you in this box, and you can be as broad. Like, I literally had a conversation earlier, and this is new. This is, I don't even know if it's tea. This is new shit right here. I was like, yo, I want to be in an action movie. And the guy I work with, he was like, we can do that. And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. Podcaster, action movie. I'm on billboards. I'm just going for the things.
You know what? And you mentioning these things, it made me think of Solange, right? It's like, we wanted her to be a Beyonce, and she was like, no, I am a Solange. And she, kind of like not limiting herself to the music realm, and really kind of like, super embraced by the visual arts world. So like performing in museums, working with dancers, creating these kind of performance pieces. And I'm like, ooh, I'm sure that was also kind of like a moment of, it's nerve-wracking, I'm sure, because you're like, oh no, am I going to limit my XYZ? But no, you didn't. It's creating this new lane. And then, you know what, once you're able, so you may be alone in that lane, but then at a certain point when you are kind of like manifesting the vision, and then people catch up to it, they're like, oh, that's what you meant. And it's like, that's what I meant the whole time.
So yeah, I'm going to toot it right now. Like, not too long ago, I was getting, early in the nascent stages, I was getting a lot of shit about being a podcaster. Like, nobody does that. And then suddenly, yo, Rob, how can I get in a, it's like, yeah, it's a thing. And
I hope you're like, here are my fees. Let me know which one you'd like.
Absolutely. Here, it's a tiered out program. But it's one of those things. And I don't know if you agree with, maybe you do, because like I said, there's some connections there. You might be an air sign. So I think that there is a color or racial element in making those things kind of smaller, what have you, of, oh, you shouldn't be able to do that. Let's categorize you in this way. Here's the 3 things you get to say you are. And 2 of them are descriptors, and one of them is what you do. And that doesn't work for me. I like commas.
Yeah, well, you know what? And also, I mean, kind of like jumping off from that, this idea that like artists, especially, Black artists, Indigenous artists, brown artists, that there's this also very real pressure of, okay, well, so obviously you're making a political statement. Talk about your struggles, talk about your traumas. Tell me how this is in the work. When, for a long time also, and I've actually had conversations like this often with artists of color, and kind of like internalizing that. So like, yes, that comes through the work, but that's not the limits of the work, that, actually I was in an artist retreat a couple of years ago, and Joyce J. Scott, the amazing Joyce J. Scott from Baltimore, at one point mentioned like, you know what, I make art because I felt like it. Period. Nothing else. And it's like, shocking. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, it doesn't always have to, like, don't force that upon me, because we are, multi-layered human beings with a variety of existences. Like maybe I want to make some abstract artwork. Maybe I'm just interested in color, not even attached to race or racial identity. And I feel like that I see it changing, but that's kind of, again, it's like, who's imposing that on this group of people?
Yeah, because it's too much of a responsibility, I think. Like as you touched on, it comes to the work, comes to what you're doing, and in for me, trying to get more comfortable at doing this and looking at it from that space of, this is my art, this is my ikigiri or what have you. And I know I always botch it, but that's what it's my purpose of getting up, and I end up doing these things, and only up until recently I got the whole, you're radical, you're this, you're that. And I was like, I've always been a 6'4", 3. Well, I hope not, because my mom gave birth, like I've always been a 6'4". Hold on, Jay. I've always been a black man, and, living in this world. So my viewpoint, the way I perceive things, the things I want to talk about, they're going to, it's baked in. It's baked deep inside. And that's the thing. And so, Speak on this. This is of supreme interest to me. So, what is it? What is his name? Rollo May. He has this book I've been reading about the daily rituals, like the morning rituals of artists. So, speak on yours. What are your daily creative rituals? Because I feel like everyone has them, and some of them are weird. Like, look, I have toast every morning. And then, so what does your daily rituals look like?
Well, you know what? I feel like it's not one set of daily rituals. I think just from the top of my head, I can probably separate them into when I'm on a deadline and when I am kind of able to just be kind of like a little bit more slowed down and exploring ideas or materials. So, if I'm on deadline, it really is just about the necessities of life. Like, you're going to stuff your mouth with something in the morning as breakfast. It doesn't even matter. Now run to the studio, get there, keep trucking, because the deadline is very much looming. So in those times, it's more about, if the work is already finished, it really is just about the drawing or thinking about the exhibition space, or just whatever the process may be that you're at in terms of the execution of this deadline. And if it's when, those moments when it's a little bit more slowed down and you're caught up, those are exciting for me. It always starts with just making it to the studio no matter what, you know what I mean? So getting to the studio is kind of like the first step and the biggest step, because as soon as you're there, whether you do, 2% of something productive or it ends up being 50%, you just never really know, but it's about being there and being engaged with the work. Maybe it was just a day of thinking that day, but it actually results in so much productivity because you've kind of like figured out the process to get to point B. But yeah, so for me, it's really, I guess to boil it down, it would be, my ritual is getting to the studio. Yeah. That's it. Get to the studio. You're good. And obviously then again, when I'm in slow down mode, that's when reading about art is exciting and interesting. So like, and you know what? I mean, you're kind of making me think about this. And it's like, what are my rituals? And it's true. Like I do, when it's slowed down, pull up articles. That's like an exciting moment to see what's going on in places that maybe I can't get to if I can't get to New York, or, I was in Tulsa for a chunk of time and it's middle America. So, even just seeing what's going on in the East Coast or the West Coast, like what's exciting through, written text. Listening to podcasts, I think is super helpful. You were just talking about it, but there's so many, there's so many podcasts now that it's like, holy cow, like plethora of artist interviews. And for me, that's just so rich to, hear other artists process what they're thinking about, because there's always, kind of like themes and umbrellas that we all kind of like share and fit in, like always discovering things at the same time, but like in different ways because we're all so unique, So, reading, and then obviously going and looking at art again, when it's a slowed down moment. And then obviously then it gets less, mystical or magical, and then back to the reality. So always writing, researching for grants, like where is the next exhibition going to be? How am I going to fund the practice? Like, what am I working on for next year that maybe needs a substantial amount of money? Well, who's going to pay for that? So it's like, yes, fun rituals, but it's also like art is work, So it's very much like it's business side and then creative side.
And I think that's been a theme, especially in some of the earlier episodes of like, I remember talking with James Nasty, and he'd mentioned like, sometimes people just don't have their stuff together. And he was like, I just want to do a class where people recognize that there is the art side, there is the business side. They have to wash each other's hands, because you can't do one without the other, really.
And that's actually a big one. And I think that, you know, because it's drilled into our head, really, that this romantic notion of like, and then I was just an artist and it was beautiful and nothing else. And it's like, that's too romantic. Like, that's not how it functions. So, you know, for me, I've been like, the reason I've maintained, you know, a professional independent practice officially, like, oh my God, I'm just doing this for about 6 years. And, you know, I can assure you that being a quote unquote full-time artist means 50% in the studio, and the other 50% is very much administrative work, research, interacting with people, and doing that business element, you know? So it's like, no, you can't always be smoking that joint in the studio. Sorry. Like, sometimes you have to actually be meeting people, and it's like, damn. But guess what? I appreciate that, because I'm like, that's okay with me. Like, because to your point, I know that doing the admin work leads to my downtime, my fun time, my exciting time, my production time. So, you know, you can't have one without the other, like you said.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's a thing where just arriving to it, this idea and having all these really cool things happen recently, you know, it's just work that gets put in, because, you know, being very aware of it. Like, I, as a kid, you know, and even to my adults, and even now, where I wanted to be an artist, and then I kind of shifted into admiring, observing, and being artist adjacent, right? And being able to see these things. And it's like, but in doing business stuff during that time, running a few businesses here and there, and getting a business degree. So it's like, I understand that side, and I'm starting to be more aware through these interviews of what that artist life looks like. And one of the big things in doing these podcasts, it's artists, entrepreneurs, and tastemakers. It gives you like, I would imagine the entrepreneur should be listening to the artists, you know, and the artists should be listening to the entrepreneurs, and
very much
getting something from it. So we talked about the front end of make sure you get to the location, you get to the venue, you get to your place. Let's talk about that back end of it. Like, you know, what are some memorable responses you've had to your work or what have you? 'Cause I understand that all artists are there and seeing like how the audience may respond to their work, but some do. And you're doing a little bit of everything. You're everywhere. You know, you're right in here right now, actually.
You know what? Yeah. So, you know what? Actually, I mean, the one that's coming to mind is actually just the most recent. So, just this week, I've been getting multiple messages, and actually from strangers, because I have a current exhibition, Sunset Moonlight, at the Walters Art Museum. This is a part of the Sondheim Artist Prize finalist exhibition, which is actually on view until July 18th, 2021, during the regular museum hours. But what I was a little bit shocked, because I'm getting these messages, and at least 3 of them so far have mentioned either tearing up or full on literally crying in the middle of the exhibition. Again, these are strangers. So I'm like, okay, well, I have to believe you, because what? And again, I'm very surprised, but it also, you know, reassures me about the power of art and the presence that it has with or without the artist present. You know what I mean? Like, the decision-making already took place, the making took place. I have let this ship sail, and now people are encountering it, you know? So I just think that's a beautiful thing, you know, the power of what, the presence of the art, but also the power of what art can do for a human, to the soul, really.
And we live for those moments, really. I mean, I would imagine is being.
I mean, that's never happened. I was like, what am I reading? This is crazy. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I mean, and one thing that I think is different about this exhibition than others, because I mean, yes, I've gotten a message or two here and there from other things, but this one, it's like a significant uptick. And the only shift is that instead of showing a singular body of work here, I am for the first time bringing 5 bodies of work from the past 10 years. Oh, wow. So really, I'm presenting a survey exhibition of my artistic production over the last 10 years. And I think that the work together is maybe creating that, you know, that humming, like it makes sense, because now it's in relationship to each other. So we were talking about being in your own lane, and it's like, oh my God, maybe here the work is like again, maybe the vision has been brought, to fruition, and I'm hoping anyway. And I'm like, oh, people must be responding to that. Anyway, that's,
You're selling a ticket. So what I'm going to have to do is go there and I'm going to shed a few tears and
email
feel
me.
something and email you. I'm going to feel something in this black, dark heart of mine. So one of the things early in we talked about was this notion of representation and being seen. So just describe from your vantage point, because everyone has their own, definition. Some people feel like, oh, well, they got a black person in there or they got a brown person in there. All good. Check that box. Describe representation from your vantage point, and why is it important within the arts and culture community?
So I think you're right. I think representation is a first good step, but it's definitely not the final step by any means, because to your point just now, that it's easy to be like, oh, check, like quota, met, the end. No. So it does start with becoming visible, audible, having opportunities to speak and just kind of like shift the conversation, if you will. But it also continues into leadership roles, into decision-making roles, and really, frankly, in infiltrating the structures of power, which for so long have sought out to impede, Black, brown, indigenous people from even entering. So again, first good step, definitely not it. Yeah. It's not the end. It's like, okay, then what? Like, okay, great. The door is open. Or maybe it's not even open. It's cracked. Okay, not nice. Now I want to see the other rooms. Okay.
I want the grand tour, and I don't want this this representation to turn into tokenism. I just want it to. And one of the things that I like to do, because I think I might be the next great critic of life.
Oh yeah, we need more of those. We need more of those. Honestly,
that's the lane I like to live, and it's like, that's not how you do that. And literally, that's how I go with it. And the thing that I always look for when that bone is thrown or what have you, or if you're vegan, that stem, I don't know. Once you have it, what are you going to do with it? That's what I always look for. It's like, don't fall for it, because we have all of these things that I think separate us from the real thing, and we are in love with here. And I think many places around the world, but we're in love with here, power. Power is at the root of all of these things that lead to people being mistreated and all of these different things. And going back to it, it goes to, we don't want to have people in these spots, like you said, leadership positions and things like that. We don't want you having the power to put more people like you here, because it takes away from our power.
Well, you know what? This cartoon is just, I'm going to botch it. I wish I had it. But they drew this thing and they're like, it's a meeting of like, the white executives, and they're like, oh my God, like another like Black or brown person left. And they're like, why did they leave? And it's like, well, they were great. They just didn't align with our white ideals. And it's like, well, that's it. It is. And you know what? Even from being in groups of, educators or arts administrators, I see this often where the conversation is about where it becomes toxic, where you bring in that one person, but really it's an overtly abusive situation. And it's an abusive situation because, and violent, really, this person is supposed to kind of like shift centuries of this like fucked up mindset that has perpetuated and become quote unquote normal. So then, folks don't last in those environments because you're the only one. You're constantly fighting. And when you're constantly fighting, you're constantly being depleted. You know what I mean? And so I think that is actually a function of white supremacy. And I've noticed that ever since forever. It's like, oh, you're always being asked the questions. You always have to defend. And actually, I think Toni Morrison talks to that, where it's like, you're always going to be asked to kind of clarify yourself, when in reality, it's like, I owe you nothing. I'm just going to go ahead and go on my own lane and make the work happen, And I think it's also Toni Morrison who has that quote about, once you get to one of these positions, and it's not necessarily an introductory position, if you will, but it's like, oh, you're in a leadership position. Don't forget to like go back and let others in, It's like, we're stronger that way. You know what I mean? This like mentality of scarcity, or, oh, there's not enough to go around. I feel like, again, that's also a tactic of white supremacy, where it's like, actually, we know for a fact there's plenty of money going around. It's just who's controlling it and where is it actually ending up.
Yeah. And, I try to, in this kind of way, I always look for these emergent artists. I look for people who, it's always like, if you're in a group that looks like you're not getting your fair share, your fair shake, to the front. Come on down. Come on down. I'll use my limited platform, but people check it out to, try to amplify or what have you in whichever way I can. And, for me, it's like almost paying off some karmic debt. It's like I've been shitty on podcasts for a long time, making fun of all types of weird news stories. It's like, all right, what can I do that matters to me? Not in a sellout sort of way, because I'm still do what I think is interesting, but still do things that I think are congruent with my values. And I love Baltimore. I love what makes up the culture here. And I believe that the artists and just the artists, the businesses and just people that are around that are about this city, I think that they make it worth living in. And that's always been something that's important to me. I've had all types of opportunities to leave, and I always put it this way. It's like, I can't guarantee I'll never leave. The only place I would leave for would have to be a place that looks a lot like Baltimore.
And you know what? Yeah, I've been getting some opportunities outside of Baltimore, but my home base has always remained Baltimore. But I spent a big chunk of time, I think I mentioned it earlier, in Tulsa. Yeah. And, with it's middle of America. It was definitely an eye-opening for me, like kind of like, holy shit, understanding, the complexities and kind of like, just, I don't know, to put it in this way, like the other side, like, holy cow, like how people view the world. And just 2 days ago was the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial. Yeah. So 100 years, Black Wall Street was razed to the ground. And, 100 years later, not a single prosecution, not a single person has been like, named, and nothing really has been done. And now with this current, centennial, there was a celebration or a commemoration, and it was so stark, like the difference between what the actual, living survivors and descendants wanted and how they were trying to organize and commemorate this, and how white Tulsa and white Oklahoma wanted to commemorate it. And because they controlled the funds in that way, it's horrible. It's fucking horrible. Like, it's like, holy shit, you people are crazy and totally white supremacists and totally aligned with Trump and totally do not care for the actual like realities of what happened here. And instead you are dealing with this white fragility, this just white fragility is the word, because it's like, you can't handle that is the history that you're stemming from. I think that it's amazing, and that's what we have to do, is like create these opportunities and create our own spaces. So what actually the descendants and the current living, folks from the massacre, they created kind of like an opposing festival and like a celebration, and it was night and day, to the point where the official Centennial Commission, which is literally all white people, had to disband 2 days before the actual, centennial. Yeah. Because Stacey Abrams dropped out, John Legend dropped out as soon as they heard about what the politics were behind this, So, but again, the actual community creating their own space and the way that they wanted to commemorate these things and celebrate the current population was amazing. And it's like, holy cow, we need to, if it can be envisioned, we need to make it happen for ourselves, right? Because it's like, nope. I can be of like two minds on it, but I lean towards fuck that. That's what my lane generally goes towards. And, some people have this mentality of how are we supposed to get in if we don't just accept what they give us? These are the only, let's look at it from pop culture, right? These are the only roles they would give us. It's like, you don't have to accept that shit. So, I without naming where I'm working, they made an offer for all of the Black employees. I remember last year. And, around this time last year, there was a lot of, very present and very newsworthy unrest between all types of races, all different races. Right. And I remember they gave us a half day for Juneteenth. And I was like, oh my, thank you so much. And we got to get on the meeting with the group. It was a mailing list, the Black employees of this company. And I was like, this is a weird list I'm on. And just listening to people, and everyone was really about how can I make more money? Very individualistic, right? And my standpoint was, I've seen some systemic shit that we need to sort out here. Oh, let's focus on the money thing. So now, and moving forward, the same company I'm at, Juneteenth is now a paid day off. It's now a full day now. And I was like,
when was this? When did this first happen though? Like you guys knew about this, so now you suddenly have a conscience in this area, or even other local things, companies, shoe companies and such. It's like, oh, you have been in Baltimore for over 20 years, 25, I believe.
And people are saying, pushing back, and suddenly they're like, oh, a change of heart, have we? And it's like, is it? But, I think it is a moment. And, before we started recording, we were talking about this, like, this new kind of wave that's coming in where people are, and I obviously definitely tied to both the pandemic and this like overt, racial-based violence from police over the, for years. But I think that because of the pandemic, maybe it was because we were in this like existential moment. It was like a moment of being just fed up. So like this pushback is actually quite exciting for me. And even though people are now rebranding this idea of like cancel culture as a bad thing, I'm like, you know what though? I feel like it's just about, being held up to whatever actions or whatever thing you ended up doing. It's like people are just not like speaking back, and they want some answers. And if you can't answer those things, there's problems.
Yeah,
and nobody wants to lose money, honestly.
It's accountability. It's accountability. Yes. One of the things I put out there, and I was like, you got to have the right folks around. And I was like, look, the queer community, they get it. Like, don't fuck with them because it's over for your ass. And I've maintained that for a very long time. And it's one of those things where I was like, we need better PR with some of these moves. I was like, like when people were talking defund the police, I was like, that's an idea there. I think it should be more around, let's reallocate these funds. Let's take them from there and let's put them somewhere else. Namely, these areas. Not a politician, but these areas you can see in every budget. Education is fucked up. Infrastructure is fucked up. Healthcare, race stuff is fucked up. Take some of that money from the blue and put it in these other areas. Because instead of just this notion of defund, say your hashtag and keep it moving. But
you know what? But I think that, and we were also talking about this earlier, but this idea of like the nuance of things, because I think that people were getting held up on the title of what was encompassing this. And so defund the police, it did not end at defund the police. It actually encompassed everything you just said. It was just literally like, you know what? It's people not reading the article and reading the headline, and people not actually doing research, just like, oh, something about defund the police. I understand everything about this, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, you don't. It's like a very simple mind, a simple way of thinking. You know what I mean? Where it's like, it's not just a thing, because guess what? In politics, you see both Republicans and Democrats, but Republicans really, like, I mean, pro-life. It's like, what the fuck? Like, it makes it seem like you are this lovely thing. And it's like, no, you're fucking evil. And what you're saying is like, trying to like rule over like a woman's body, mostly men doing that. But I'm like, but again, the phrase is pro-life. And it's like, oh, it's almost sweet.
I mean, I do the thing of like, are you qualified to do that at all? Like, oh yeah, these white guys are going to make decisions for women's bodies. You're not qualified, at all.
When have they been though? So
so the last question is we're getting out there, but we can get out there. Last question I have, it goes back, and I was trying to segue, but we were having a really good conversation. I was trying to segue into it. Describe your experience in Baltimore and what it means to be an artist with connections here.
Oh, Baltimore. I feel like Baltimore has been so good to me. I don't know. I mean, that's a place where I came of age. That's a place where I really established myself as, an independent person and really established myself as an artist here. And throughout the last 16 years, I feel that it's been the best incubator for my work, for my ideas. It's been a great place to like try out new things, to fail miserably, to succeed intensely. So I love Baltimore. I think Baltimore is so special and doesn't get its due as much as it should. And I mean, also Baltimore is the place, again, I mentioned her earlier, Joyce J. Scott is in Baltimore, Amy Sherrill, this is where she painted the Michelle Obama portrait. And, it has both a great cultural scene, an art scene, a music scene. Baltimore is just great. Let's just leave it at that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And much appreciated for saying that. I think I was involved with this really cool project back in February, and it entailed giving roses to the people in Baltimore, literally giving you your roses. And it was just like hearing that positive reinforcement, because we don't hear it enough. It's just Baltimore, insert whatever bad thing, period. And instead of like normalizing the people here and the people that call this place home and the people that have cut their teeth here. And I think that gets missed a lot. And it's just, you know, I always point out, and I'll leave with this before we get into some shameless plugs, you know, for as quote unquote bad as the city is, there's a lot of residential properties being built up even during a pandemic. So people want to move here. Yeah. But it's dangerous. White people in flip-flops here, but it's dangerous.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's very, because, you know, that does piss me off in terms of like just money not being allocated correctly. You know, I'm tying like connections between, again, like having spent some time in other places, like even Washington, D.C., but now most recently in Tulsa. Like North Tulsa is, you know, the West Baltimore. It's like, it's in Tulsa, it's literally, you know, cut apart from the white area through a highway, you know, that was very intentionally built. Yeah. So like, just the resources not being allocated correctly. And imagine if they were, you know, it's like that instead of other people, sure, it's lovely that other people are being attracted and coming from elsewhere, but what about supporting also the people that are presently here, you know, that have a long history of being just from Baltimore, you know, born and raised, and like, and making sure that folks have some kind of pathway to like ownership, to owning their own homes, to like having access. And obviously, and the city does have some programs, but I'm just thinking like not in a large scale, you know, when it really shifts just kind of this annoying, depressing, and just way that things have happened for such a long time there.
Yeah. Well said. So where can they find you online? Plug yourself.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the easiest thing would be, you can always check my website at hoesycorona.com. And all my handles on social media are also at Hoesy Corona. So I make it easy. And that's HOESYCORONA. And I guess I'll plug it in again, but I do have a current exhibition at the Walters Art Museum titled Sunset Moonlight. And it's a 10-year survey of my artistic production. Most of really all of the work was, you know, birthed in Baltimore. So for me, I'm very proud of this exhibition, and I am just delighted and excited to share it with everyone in Baltimore.
That's great. Go check that out, folks. So I want to thank you for coming onto the podcast and being such a great guest.
Thank you. Yes, I love this. This was great.
So for Hoesy Corona, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.